Mormon Church, they, so far as I know, they believe in continuing revelation, wherein the prophet has changed the practices of the church with continuing revelation from God. Have any of these processes to get into heaven been changed in that way with the life of the church, or is that process more or less what it looked like in Joseph Smith's day?
As far as has the endowment ceremony, have the temple ceremonies changed?
Yeah, and the requirements specific to get into heaven or any of the details.
The ceremonies themselves have evolved a little bit over time. Things have been taken out, like the penalties, they're no longer part of the ceremony. They don't do that. The washing and anointing, where I had to put on the tunic and this guy rubbing oil on my naked body, they don't do that anymore. I believe now it's just like a thumb swipe across your forehead. I think is what happens. I don't think you strip down naked anymore. You know, certain oaths are changed and things like that.
But the core is still kind of the same.
I believe that the core is not very familiar with the very, very early endowment because it was secret, you know, they promised never to reveal it, so I don't have a lot of details on it. Good question?
Yeah, I was just a little bit unclear. The connection between Mormonism and Freemasonry. Like for Joseph Smith, as a Master Mason, decided to spawn a religion out of it? Or?
After Joseph Smith had formed the LDS Church, the church moved around to different places because they were run out from town to town. When they got to Nauvoo, Joseph joins Freemasonry. So this is well after the church is established. He joins Freemasonry. He goes through their secret ceremonies, and then a few weeks later, he has a new ceremony. So that's the connection. Yeah.
I mean, you talked about this a couple times, but I don't just maybe just think grasp it really. Is the belief in the church that he really read the scripture out of Latin?
Okay, that's a difficult one. Because as the internet is becoming more prominent and there's more people are learning about this stuff, the church is having a harder time hiding it. So you will find in some sources, you will find reference to Joseph putting his head in a hat. Not very many, and they're not going to be very mainstream. Like, you're not going to see them in a church magazine. You're not going to see them in a Sunday school meeting. The really difficult thing, especially about that story, is that before Joseph formed the LDS Church, he was arrested on a crime called glass looking. He would go into the forest, he'd take people with him, he'd charge them a fee. He would say, for this fee, I'm going to look at these rocks, and I'm going to find buried treasure for you. So he'd look at the rocks, he'd put his face in a hat, he'd lead them through the forest, and then at the last minute, some spirit took the treasure away, the treasures. People got pissed off, had him arrested. I believe he was arrested 4 times in that charge. But you know, he had a thing for magic rocks. In fact, in the celestial kingdom, when you enter the celestial kingdom, you will get a rock. A special rock, a clear rock, and it'll have a new name on it, which is the name that you get anytime. Yeah.
What's the church's stance on like different ethnicities getting in heaven? Because I've heard a lot of rumors like African Americans can't get into heaven, or like different, like I don't really know what the official stance on that is.
Let me go back. This is something I had to skip over because we're out of time. Okay, here we are with the map, all right? So, there are actually 3 types of spirits in the pre-existence. First group, they reject the plan. They are Satan's people. Go off, they don't get a body. People who accepted Jesus' plan are the people who came to earth and were born with white skin. Sorry, I know this is really hard to talk about. People who were on the fence, not one way or the other. They came to earth and they were cursed with a black skin to show how they had not been faithful in the pre-existence. This was the thing, this was the last straw for me personally, when I found this out. There are entire sections of a book called Mormon Doctrine that was published in the 1970s, and that was written by a Mormon apostle that talks all about this. And the section is titled Negroes. And it says that that they were not as valiant in the pre-existence as the rest of us. And so they were born on this earth with a dark skin. And then in the Book of Mormon, there's the idea that the ancient Israelites who came here and who were not righteous were cursed with a dark skin. That stuff's still in there. It's still in the Book of Mormon. You can pick up any Book of Mormon today and read about that. The church tries to dodge around it. They don't like answering that question, but it's still there. To answer your question, though, yes, people of all races can get into heaven as long as they go through the different ceremonies. And now, any person of any skin color can go through the temple ceremonies. Blacks were not allowed to go into the temples until 1978 because of this cursed skin doctrine. Another email.
It sounds like from the sort of story of the pre-mortal existence that there were just a bunch of spirits at once, and then there was this fractioning off of the thirds. Since people are still being born, new people, were they spirits who were around at that time and they were just like on the waiting list to get bodies?
Exactly.
Or, okay, so it's not a continuing process of like, you can choose A, Jesus, B, Satan, or C, being black. And so we were all kind of there once, and now they're just in line to get bodies.
Exactly.
At this point, okay.
With like Protestant Christianity, they hold to some sense of Scripture's it, sola scriptura. So you can kind of get a general idea of what the theology of any one group is going to look like, just if you were to read through the New Testament, and you can get what they're at least extrapolating off of. So when I was trying to learn about Mormonism, I read the Book of Mormon, and it's not like that at all. The Book of Mormon is less theologically loaded and more, it seems like an attempt to make a different history of. So what I was wondering, I guess, is what kind of resources would one have to read to get an idea of what church practices are like, both now and in the past, and what are the basis of these? Like, you said there was the quad, that was one thing, and then I remember seeing a particular Mormon person who I was talking with reference the King Follett Discourse, and it just seems like there's a lot of scattered, smaller things that together make church policy. Like, what things would you suggest reading to get an idea of what?
You're looking for current doctrine and practices?
Or
do you want to know how it's changed over time? Because those are two very different things.
Yeah, and I guess that's why my question's unclear, because I'm not really clear on how it works. So
I have to think about that. Come see me afterwards, and I can give you a list of some things that off the top of my head. I've been out here for 10 years. So I have to think about what would be good to help you figure that out, especially considering what you already know or may not know.
I grew up in the church, and I remember growing up, my grandparents talking to me about immortal existence, and explaining to me that as time goes on, the closer we get to the second coming, these people being brought into the world are somehow more supportive of Jesus in the immortal existence. And I was wondering if was that something that's actually taught? Is that true, or is that your
Yes, very much so. In fact, Mormons today. Are born today are taught that they were the most valiant, the most righteous, the most awesome spirits. And the reason that they're here in this day, right before Christ is coming, is because the world is such a shithole that they need these really valiant spirits to be around to kind of buoy up the church and to make things right. It's this amazing ego trip, Yeah.
I noticed you referenced the journals of discourse a couple times, and I talked to a missionary once about those, and he said that they're not actually church doctrine anymore. Like, is that true, or was I don't really know. So
there's a joke among ex-Mormons that trying to figuring out Mormon doctrine is like trying to nail Jello to a wall. It's doctrine if it's okay, if it's not embarrassing, if it's not controversial. It's probably doctrine. If there's something weird about it, if there's something controversial about it, then it's just a man's opinion. So the thing is that you'll see the Journal of Discourses. You'll see quotes from the Journal of Discourses in Mormon Sunday school manuals today. They will take some things, and those things are doctrine, but the things that are embarrassing, they get left out.
So it's kind of like Leviticus and evangelicals.
Yeah, pick and choose. Pick and choose Mormonism.
Yeah.
Oh, one question. Yeah.
But I was wondering if you guys read the book Under the Banner of Heaven, and if that kind of stuff still goes on in Southern Utah.
You're talking about like blood, oaths, blood atonement, and dynamics?
So
Maybe not, no. So,
Okay, sorry, I just I can't find the line, but if you've read the book like Under the Banner of Heaven, then
I haven't read it, yeah.
okay, but like, the kind of thing that's addressed like the Muslim or the Mormon colonies and the polygamy and
Oh, with polygamy.
yeah, does that still go down the line? Is that
Well, the
what you're
Mormon church stopped practicing polygamy. They said they stopped practicing polygamy in the 1800s as a condition for Utah gaining state.
saying? Okay.
So officially they did. What they were actually doing is they were sending the Mormon hierarchy down to Mexico, to Chihuahua, Mexico. And they were set the Mormon colonies that were set up there. In fact, there are still some remnants of Mormon colonies there today. So officially, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not practice polygamy. They excommunicate anyone who does engage in the practice. But there are now splinter groups that have split off, and they're saying, no, we are the true church because we have the real practice. We have the eternal practice of what's called celestial marriage, or plural marriage. And we have the true version of Mormonism, and Mormonism itself has gone apostate. We're giving up clearly.
I was going to ask, I recently saw 8, The Mormon Proposition, which is a documentary that, while it is very one-sided, but then again, this talk was too, which is why I came. But in 8, Mormon Proposition, they spoke to a couple of ex-Mormons that spoke about what a couple of them called emotional blackmail that keeps Mormons, especially younger Mormons, that would otherwise perhaps be more supportive of LGBT issues from ever voicing their support because they're afraid of being completely cut off from pretty much their entire life by being excommunicated. I don't know if you would even have an answer, but do you feel when you, looking back at your time in the church, that there is a larger group of younger people within the church that perhaps are starting to raise their eyebrow more at what's happening in the church but is afraid to say something, or do you think that they're towing the line as much as their parents and grandparents?
There is a movement, and it is growing among young Mormons in regards to LGBT issues. If you come see me afterwards, I can send you some really interesting links where Brigham Young University students are publishing articles speaking out against the church and the stance on prosperity. It's a slow movement, but it is growing. The problem is that you have all these old white men in Utah who are calling the shots. And these old white men will be in the positions until they die. So it will be many, many years before the Mormon churches will be able to make some real reform in that area.
They could always take, even when they do that, they could always take the Catholic approach and just pick someone older and more conservative anyway.
Or maybe young Mormons will just get fed up and leave, which I think is probably more likely.
How do women in the church actually pretend to be okay with the whole polygamy thing?
I don't understand it myself.
So when the whole new scriptures were rewritten, did Joseph Smith keep any of the old scriptures or any parts of the Old Testament, or did he just throw everything out and say, oh, that was all made up?
So Lucy Harris, I might have her first name wrong. She took those 116 pages, she hid them away, and they disappeared. It's a mystery of history. We're not quite sure where they are.
No, that's not. I meant when he when he said, okay, the current Bible, composed of the Old Testament and then the New Testament. When he said, okay, this isn't valid anymore, I'm running my own testament, based off the gold plates. Did he keep anything from the Old Bible?
Okay, Joseph Smith didn't discard the Old Bible at all. No, in fact, that's still part of the Mormon canon. They have the Old and the New Testament. That is the history of people in the East, in Jerusalem, and that area. Okay, the Book of Mormon purports to be a history of people here in the Americas. So it's a totally different story, different continents.
Oh, okay.
They still have both.
Do the Mormons stress end times prophecy in the apocalypse?
Yes, they do. There's a Mormon prophecy that in the United States, the Constitution will hang by a thread, and it's the Mormon Church that will step in and save the country and save the Constitution. We believe in Armageddon that there will be a large battle in the Valley of Megiddo in the Middle East. We believe that there will be a second coming. not so much the rapture, as born-again Christians or evangelical Christians would interpret it. But there will be something called the morning of the first resurrection, where the most valiant souls, they will be resurrected first. In fact, the resurrection will happen in the order of your righteousness. So the most righteous people will get resurrected first. That's why Jesus was the first one to be resurrected. And then everyone else will follow afterwards, up until Judgment Day. Yeah.
What's the dropout rate? I mean, how many people were Mormons, decide to be ex-Mormons, and how is the church faring? I mean, is it a faith that's growing, or is it?
They're hemorrhaging members. They lose more members than they're gaining. And you see that in all sorts of statistics. The number of baptisms per year, the number of baptisms per missionary, the number of congregations that are created. The church is losing souls. And it's doing it very quickly. Why that is, I have my own ideas, but yeah.
It sounds like you got pretty far along the process of, the steps needed to take to go get into heaven and to be a fully inaugurated Mormon. What sort of percentage or proportion of people in the church make it all the way to the end? Was it unusual for you to get that far, especially being relatively young in my mind? Because I had this image of generally when a church has a lot of really secretive high practices, it's like people who have been in the church for 50 years working their ass off and are really old, really white, make it, and then everybody else is like at sort of early stages and aren't allowed to go any further unless they really, really do something special to prove themselves. So how much of it is normal going through the motions and how much is sacred, kind of abnormal?
It's really the sealing ceremony, the getting married, is really the best thing you can do in Mormons. That's like the most awesome thing, and it's really pretty easy to do. Just fall in love and get married. So going through that process, it's not like a coming of age kind of thing. Just all adult Mormons go through that. So as long as you're still attending church and you're keeping the rules and things like that, everyone can go through the process. Yeah.
Is there an explanation as to how there ended up being two different tribes in two different places who were both Israelites?
Yeah, they were one family. They all came over together. They were a group of brothers. One followed a guy named Nephi, who was righteous and awesome, and they had white skin. His brothers, Laban and Lemuel, were not righteous. And they split off with their families, and they were cursed with the dark skin. And the two families grew. They became separate nations. They crisscrossed a few times. They had a few wars, killed each other off. They switched places as who was righteous and who wasn't. But eventually, the followers of Nephi, this is like a 1,000-year story. The followers of Nephi were eventually all killed off, and only the followers of Laban, the evil brother, were left. And those are the dark-skinned Native Americans, South Americans that we know today.
So Joseph Smith, he could read, but he couldn't write. Why did he need the other guy?
He could write. He had a scribe. Maybe that was part of the scam. Was getting Martin Harris involved, but then Martin would donate money.
You talked about like the Nephites, the Lamanites having all these wars. Is there any like archaeological evidence for any of this?
Not a damn thing. in fact, the Book of Mormon says that there were all these things that the Nephites had with them that weren't in the Americas before Columbus came along, like steel bows and horses. And all these things that are just absolutely false just ended up in the Book of Mormon. It's really one of the most damning things against the book. Yeah.
At what age do most ex-Mormons leave? Because I feel like there's like some sort of like critical mass point where you're like too Mormon to quit.
I have known people who stopped the bullshit when they were 10 years old. And as soon as they got the chance, they stopped going. I know people who have been in the church 60 years, and then they discover all the shit that I shared with you guys tonight. And they have this horrible sense of regret. for having lived a life that long in that type of life. But then coming out and having what's called the second adolescence, where you party and experiment and do drugs and sex and things, all the shit you couldn't do when you were growing up. That was fun.
You said your breaking point pretty much was when you went to college and you learned a lot about evolution and natural selection. Did you go to a religious school, or did you just not have that in high school, or what made the difference in college?
See, in high school, I did go through a biology class. And see, Mormons don't exactly reject the idea of evolution. In fact, you will find many members of the church who openly support evolution. In fact, the whole idea of becoming like gods, men evolving into gods. For some Mormons, there's not a lot of conflict with theories of evolution. The problem is, of course, is that with the Adam and Eve story, according to Mormons, there was no death and no reproduction before Adam and Eve took the fruit. So how do you explain dinosaur bones? How do you explain that there is a usual fossil? So in some contexts, some Mormons do support evolution, but it does fail on certain levels. There are some parts where it just doesn't line up correctly. So taking that college class and learning about radiocarbon dating, learning about the scientific method, learning that the first humans lived in Africa and not in Missouri. That was a big thing for me. I had to reconcile that with my faith as well. Science one.
I was just gonna ask if where you were getting what you were saying about the church hemorrhaging members, because I had heard, although I could certainly be wrong, that the LDS Mormon Church is actually the second fastest growing religious group after Islam.
Actually, according to sociologist Rodney Stark, he said that the Mormon Church is the fastest growing church in the world. I think he said that in the 90s. The problem is that he was using official church sources. He was using sanctioned data. I was going to put this in, but I just decided to cut it out at the end. There is an actual member of the church who runs a website called Cumorah.org. And in that site, he crunches the numbers. He's got a bunch of Excel graphs and things like that where he shows that the numbers have been plummeting. They have been for quite some time. In fact, what's really interesting is that each April, the church will report on certain numbers, like how many members were baptized and things like that. And what's interesting is that as time has gone along over the years, certain statistics aren't announced anymore. They just stop saying how many members were baptized, or how many members went through this, or how many did that, as the Christian prophet each year. Yeah.
You mentioned that there's not a shred of evidence for the archaeological picture that Joseph Smith creates. And, you know, it's not uncommon for a group of people to believe in something where there's not really a whole lot of, like young Earth creationists, for instance, who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. What they do is they massage the data to fit whatever conclusions they want. And I know that there's some extent of that in, you know, I've heard, you know, BYU archaeologists who made it their life's goal to justify this picture with whatever they can, basically. How common is that in the Mormon Church? Is it like with Protestants, where for the most part the young Earth creationists are a fringe group that isn't taken seriously by the vast majority, or is that?
Let's say this is a human. Okay. And there's certain animals common in South America. I believe the pronunciation is tapir. Tapir. They're about that high. I actually saw one at a zoo a few years ago. But I took a picture of it too. But anyway, many Mormon apologists will say, well, when Joseph Smith saw the word horse when he was translating to the Nephites, they were actually thinking tapir, and this is what the Nephites were riding into battle. Plausible, I don't know. Horse, tapir, I don't know. Steel wasn't steel. Steel was actually kind of metal, but Joseph Smith knew what steel was, so when he was translating, he translated it into a word that he would understand. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if you're familiar with historical relations between Mormons and Native Americans.
Pastor T talk, I've heard things that there were a lot of, that there's just a lot of dirty laundry that the church is trying to cover up in terms of violence. I was wondering if you
I heard a little bit about that, but I don't really know enough about it to really answer that.
So I know that in a lot of like Protestant sects, it's very important. Like evangelism is a big idea, and like part of your salvation is to get as many people to like join your side. How important is that in Mormonism? Because I see a lot of, there's always like Mormon. Seem like in any of the doctrine, it really clearly states that you have to go out and get a bunch of people to become Mormon.
What's really interesting is that one day, and I apologize for not knowing everyone's names, it's been a while for me. One day, a young couple approaches Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is immediately attracted to his wife. Very soon, Joseph gets a revelation from God that the husband has been called to serve a mission in England. While this man is in England, Joseph approaches the wife and he says, "The Lord has revealed to me that you are to be my plural wife." This is something I didn't have time to put in. The reason that Joseph Smith used these secret oaths and had people swear to secrecy was so that when he could go through the sealing ceremonies with other men's wives, people would not be able to talk about it. That's why the Mormon ceremony is called sealing and not marriage, because Joseph Smith, A, did not have the legal authority to perform marriages, or the other Mormons didn't have it either, and B, you can't get married if you're already married to someone else. It's against the law. That's bigamy. So they called it sealing. So you become sealed to someone for time and all eternity, as opposed to getting married till death do you part. So the Mormon temple ceremony and the Mormon missionary program have very deep ties to polygamy.
Oh, so basically you send guys off.
Yep.
Okay. How do I say this? Okay, so my first girlfriend was Mormon, and her brother wasn't able to go on his mission for some reason, and it's always been bugging me, like, why can't some people go on their mission?
Worthiness issue, like those 13 questions that I showed for the temple recommend, you've done something. Usually it's some kind of sexual sin, you've had sex before you were married or something like that. It's usually that. It could also be in the case of like mental illness or some undisclosed illness or injury as well. So that's another possibility. So I don't want to say, that's why he didn't go, but, Yeah.
Usually when we think of polygamy, we think of one husband, several wives, but it seems like the wife can also be several sealed over. And
first polygamy was around, it was one woman with several husbands. Yeah. Like I said, don't think about this.
So where does like the conventional marriage license come to play? If it's sealing, not marriage, do you have to seal within the church and have a marriage ceremony performed?
The LDS Church has the legal authority to perform marriages. They'd call it sealing, and then you just fill out the regular marriage certificate. So it's all one ceremony. Except in places like in South America, in Peru, like where I served my mission, where the church doesn't have authority to perform marriages. A couple would first have a civil union, and then they would go down to the temple to participate in the sealing ordinance together.
Does the LDS Church sanction sealings without like a legal marriage? Like what if you,
You have to be legally married.
You said they no longer practice the penalties, right? That stopped about 20 years ago. When they were still doing that, if you spoke up after taking those oaths and swearing to have your throat slit and so on, was there any degree of serious follow-up on...
Not that I know of.
Threat? Okay, then was it just a bunch of empty words entirely about the punishment for not maintaining secrecy?
I don't know of anyone who's had their throat slit for talking out about it,
Or do you think that someone will come after you? Like, do they make it sound serious?
I don't think so. Not now. I'm not really worried. Yeah.
Another story I just remembered being told was something about, I think it was in Spirit Paradise, before you move on, or somewhere on this flowchart, that you are at a gate and there's some tunnel that you crawl through. And I don't know if that was a bizarre story or if that's somewhere in those eras, but I remember being told that you speak with someone at these gates and you crawl through this tunnel to the next point.
A tunnel, but perhaps it was the veil. Okay, so in the temple ceremony, after you learn all the handshakes and the signs and everything, everyone stands up and they line up at a sheet, which is hanging at the front of the room. In fact, maybe I can... Too many damn pictures. Oh, jeez. Okay, so there is this sheet that's hanging at the front of the endowment room. And almost there. Oh, Christ. Okay, there you go. Yeah, you see all the weirdness again. Okay, so you see those curtains hanging down right there? Okay, at the end of the ceremony, those actually lift up, and you line up going up to the sheets. And there are these sheets hanging, which is called the veil. If you'll remember, when you come to this earth life, you pass through the veil and you forget what happened before. I didn't tell you guys that. I totally forgot to tell you that. I'm sorry. The reason that we can't remember what happened in the pre-existence is because we passed through something called the veil, which covered up our memory. How convenient. So when you go through the temple, you pass through the veil again. Now, cut into the sheets are holes that are the same shapes as the embroidery marks on the garments. So you have a sheet like this, and then you have one cut out here, one cut out there, and I think there's one like right here. Okay, so you come up to this thing right like this. I'm really doing a terrible job of drawing this. I was not an art major. So you come and you stand in front of this thing like this. You know what? That's going to look bad. You stand up in front of this thing like this. You put one hand through this hole. You put one hand through this hole. On the other side of the veil is a person who represents the Lord. And what you do is you are tested on your knowledge of the signs and the tokens. So you reach through, you give the first token, you give the second token, you have to give the names of them and stuff like that. So you're tested. Once you pass the test, once you've said everything correctly by memory, then the veil is parted and you enter the presence of the Lord, and that's how you get inside the celestial kingdom. So I don't, not a tunnel, but maybe that's what you're referring to.
That may have been it. That sounds pretty familiar.
But that's part of the process. Interesting point. When generally men go through the temple, well, actually now, men, before they go on their mission, they have to go through the temple ceremonies. Women generally only go through the temple on the day they're getting married. What happens is that first, the husband, he'll go through the veil first. He'll circle around to the other side where his wife is. And then he will be the person on the other side of the veil. So for men, it's the Lord who is waiting to pull you into heaven. For women, your husband pulls you into heaven. Yeah.
You've answered a lot of questions about marriage and sealing, but are there any like divorce ceremonies? And if there are, would that keep you out of the celestial kingdom because you've like nullified your sealing?
Complicated also because it's a sticky subject. I mean, the church is opposed to divorce. There are teachings that any two people, as long as they're righteous, can have a happy marriage. So the church does frown on divorce. There is not a ceremony for a divorce. So you can get divorced and still be sealed to someone in the afterlife. There is something called the cancellation of There is something called the cancellation of sealing, but it is very difficult to obtain. It requires the intervention of a couple of Mormon bishops, and they have to ask you all sorts of questions about why you got divorced and what led up to it. And it's very personal and very intrusive. But once the cancellation of sealing is granted, I don't think there's a ceremony involved. I've never heard anything about it, so I think it's just paperwork, and you're done.
And would that cancellation of sealing keep you out of that like top level of the celestial kingdom? Since you've broken
Right, you have to get married again. You cannot get into the top level of Mormon heaven without being married. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought I remember you mentioning something about Mormons having a blessing of communion during church services. They take communion, like, they believe in like transubstantiation, like the Catholic Church.
It doesn't go that far. It is a symbolic gesture. So no, Mormons don't believe they're eating Jesus' flesh or drinking his blood, as Catholics do. So it's not as weird. Catholics are supposed to. Right, thank you. But yeah, it's bread and water, and it's you take it every Sunday. It's part of the Sunday services.
I've also heard about like the number of children that Mormons have relates to like the level of heaven they get into. I mean, I've noticed a lot of Mormon families have so many kids. What's the deal?
There's no rule, especially you would find nothing official today talking about that. There's this idea that God created all these spirits in the spirit world, and they're waiting for bodies. So you have to do your job to make bodies for these spirits to get into. So get at it.
Are there any powers in the lower two kingdoms, or we just like can all hang out for a while?
There is a rumor, and this is not been. Some historians have tried to find this, that apparently, and this is like 3 levels of hearsay, that Joseph Smith once said that if we knew just how awesome the lowest kingdom was, if we knew just how great the telestial kingdom was, is that we could not wait to die to get there because it's that amazing. So I don't have a lot of details about what goes on in those lower 2 kingdoms. I don't think there's a lot of information or revelation about it, but aim for the top, man. Come on.
I do remember now actually that there was some order that if you were high up, you could travel to the lower kingdoms, and Jesus could too, but you couldn't go up.
Right, that's right. Yes. Good point. Yeah. So who are in the celestial kingdom can visit their friends and family in the lower levels, but you can't go up to visit them in the celestial kingdom. So, yeah.
So you were saying that like the top tier of the celestial kingdom, you get all the bosses or whatever. You get to like own your own planet and make spirit babies. Like, what about the other 2 people? Because they're not sealed. Like, do they miss out on the spirit babies, or?
Oh yeah, they're servants to the people who are on the top level.
Oh, that's not
So when you get divorced but you're still sealed, I've heard that the men can get sealed again to another woman, but the women can't. So they would still be polygamous in the afterlife.
There are several old talks by old Mormon leaders basically saying that polygamy will be practiced in the afterlife. The reason that Mormons say is because women are much more spiritual than men are. Women, are more obedient. And men, we're just angry, horny people who don't like to listen to God. So there are going to be a lot more women than men in heaven. So,
If Hitler can't go to outer darkness, then who does? So, how do I get
You won't find anything official commenting on Adolf Hitler's baptism, so yeah, I can't answer that one for you. Yeah.
You mentioned how you were disowned by your family. I also have a friend who's Mormon, and his family disowned one of his brothers because he stopped practicing. He was telling me that their family circle has to be complete, like everybody has to be Mormon for them to get to the top level. Is that anything?
No, you get there or you don't. Yeah.
The earth is half in the outer darkness. Is that supposed to be there, or is it a spacing issue?
Okay, this roadmap was one person put this, and I don't agree 100% with everything that's on here. Like at the bottom where it says realm of Satan and then realm of deity. I don't know where he got those terms from. I've never seen them before. But that is supposed to represent how the spirits that followed Lucifer are around here. They're surrounding us right now. They're the reason you're here tonight. Are we running out of time?
One of those evil spirits, we hosted a talk.
They're here right now.
times than a female, how is it possible for there to be more females in the celestial kingdom than men?
Sorry. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Are completely exempt from the whole like missionary process? Like, has a woman ever gone on a mission in the Mormon church?
Yes. And who go? Men are required to go. Men have to serve a mission. For women, it's optional. Men go when they're 19. Women go when they're 21. Yeah.
If you get sealed to somebody and they're not righteous and they don't go to the celestial kingdom, what happens to you?
You probably get sealed to someone else, I think is what happens, is you end up getting sealed to someone who is righteous. Yeah.
So when you're at the third level of the celestial kingdom, you get to make your own spirit babies and whatever. Is that because like God is a statistician and he wants to duplicate his like little experiment here? Like, are you making a second Earth and then you have your own premortal, your own little premortal pot that you make yourself, and then you send and then you have your own little second coming with your own Messiah?
I think you got it. Yeah. Yeah.
When baptizing the dead, some lines of people should be baptized like all day long to try and crank out the numbers to get.
Yeah, if you talk about an impossible task, we're talking about billions of people who have died and gone to spirit prison that Mormons have to baptize themselves for. So the temples are running all the time. They're closed on Sundays and some Mondays and holidays. But yeah, from like 5 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, those ceremonies are going on. When I used to do baptisms for the dead, you go into the font and there's someone standing off to the side who's reading off the names of people, and you get dunked 10, 15, 20 times in a row. And you tag out and then someone else takes it. And it's exhausting. Your back starts hurting, you get cold and stuff. So, yeah, it's a pretty intense.
Speaking of lots of kids, what's the official Mormon stance on contraception? Because this could explain a lot of kids, depending on the answer.
This is actually interesting to me, is that the church has not taken an official stance on contraception. In fact, they've said that it's up to the couple to decide between themselves how many children to have. So many Mormons are contraception. Yeah.
Would there not still be an extent to which, though, the social crossover with having such long meetings after church and then splitting by genders and meeting for another 2-3 hours on Sundays? Isn't there an extent to which you could still have an unofficial push towards having more children? Because I had a friend that converted to Mormonism in high school and she got a little intensely into it. And her life plan went from being an English professor at college and being a novelist to having 7 children and moving to Alabama. That's what God wanted her to do, is because of what her peers had said. Do you think that that's common, that you get peer pressure even if it's not the church's opinion?
Yeah, yeah.
Or was my friend just
there's.
It's also
related. It's related to your question, and it's a difficult subject because on one side there's not an official position on birth control, but on the other side there's this idea that there are spirit children waiting, and that husbands and wives shouldn't be selfish, and that they should create bodies for these spirits to come down. So it's not a real easy question, and I can't really say one way or the other because it's a little bit of both.
Do you have any friends who you were friends with who were in the church or have left and now you're religion?
That's a good question. I have to think. I think one friends I knew growing up who have left the church and now drink beer with me. Yay! But not a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So does that mean that if people don't have kids fast enough, revelation could come, the soul's still trapped in there, or as soon as they're done, that's what's going to happen?
You don't think too hard about this.
Yeah. Just to clarify, when you're learning the tokens and you're going through all those ceremonies, is that something you do just as you're growing older, or is that something you do before you're going on a mission? Like cousins at the MTC right now, and I want to know if he's learned the handshake.
Yes, he has. A man goes through the endowment ceremony before he goes on his mission.
So there seems to be like a pretty strict timeline about like the second coming of Christ and then like going to the kingdom of heaven. Like, how do they account for people that are still in the premortal existence when everyone's going to the kingdom of heaven? Like, do they just get left there, or is it like some sort of like weird coincidence where as soon as everyone's out of the premortal existence, that's when Jesus comes back?
Don't think too hard about this. Any other questions? Sweet, let's drink beer. Thanks, guys.